Just two quick notes. First one, maybe you guys want to mention that since we're remote, we might not get to all the callers, so that the callers don't get, Yeah. I always tell them when I thank them for the call and I say, hey, I'll put you in. I'll let the guys know. I don't know how soon they'll get to you. So the first of all, thank you for the call. I got you. I got you. I just thought maybe it's worth mentioning so that people know a heads up. Like whoever I pick up for, I get a chance to pick up for, I let them know. And I thank them for the call. I let them know this like, hey, if you have to go, thank you for a call to begin with. Please call us again. Type of thing. Second thing, so the next time a guest curses or anything, you have the power, just like with the mic, to take over. You have to stop them. You have to give me some kind of a command, like no cursing, no cursing. It's like, hey, we have to keep it PG, something like that, so that if it's like very subtle and for whatever reason I didn't notice, just like with the clips, like let's play this clip, right? And I know that a clip has to be played for sure. Same thing with cussing. Just take over the feed. Like somebody cusses, like, hey, we can't cuss on the radio. We can't cuss on the radio, or something like that. And as soon as I hear that, it's automatic dump. Because yesterday I was in headphones and stuff. I couldn't hear what was happening. So just start talking.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my indomitable co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. Today, we'll be discussing what I consider rather epic news regarding the domestic politics, the end of the Sanders era. Bernie Sanders is no more. Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race and will inevitably, as stated in the beginning of the race, endorse one Joe Biden. And if anything like Clinton, he will be going from stadium to pillar to post backing one Joe Biden. By all honest measure, a cognitively challenged man that has no business running for office, let alone the presidency, but was a cognitively challenged man that no business running for the presidency. But the objective was clear: stop Sanders. And frankly, the only two that could have potentially did that was working in tandem: Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Sanders is a neo-octogenarian, so it's extremely doubtful that he'd be running for president again at 82. There's also a lot of people in tatters, myself included. If I was a weaker man, I'd be weeping while doing this particular episode. The hard reality is that the era of Bernie Sanders challenging the established order of power is effectively and tragically over. Before you go to bits and bunker down, though, under the cover screaming, F it all, there are opportunities for the left. Have some imagination in this process. There are opportunities for the left, and those will be discussed and explored. I'm certain I've gotten to the point of almost certainty in regards to the path to the take on this, especially from the standpoint of the left, and especially with what took place in 2020, especially what took place over the last 40 years. In the second hour, we're going to continue to discuss Sanders dropping out, but this time in the context of media's responsibility regarding Sanders' loss and the upcoming, infinitely foreseeable push to get a cognitively challenged, incoherent, inarticulate, demonstratively proven liar and potential rapist that offers nothing, Joe Biden, over the finish line. That media push will be coming up soon. Mark my words. Also, don't miss the sexist named segment of the month, or the sexiest named segment of the month, Trends with Benefits, to discuss AI conjoined with facial recognition technology. This will get dystopian if we are not active and assertive in ensuring profit and control isn't the highest objective in creating and using this technology. To be clear, those are literally the two things that is inspiring the creation of this technology. We are behind the curve. But let's start here first. The massively significant news that broke yesterday, breaking the hearts of millions. This one included. Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race, making Joe Biden the presumptive nominee. The Democratic Party should be embarrassed and ashamed of itself. There is no shame in the party, so I have no expectation of that. But people who have the capability of feeling shame should be ashamed. Biden as your pick and as your nominee should invoke something rancid in you, especially if you're part of the left. Let's hear the clip of Biden, or let's say Sanders, dropping out of the presidential race.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth. And that is that we are now some 300 delegates behind Vice President Biden, and the path toward victory is virtually impossible. So while we are winning the ideological battle, and while we are winning the support of so many young people and working people throughout the country, I have concluded that this battle for the Democratic nomination will not be successful. And so today, I am announcing the suspension of my campaign. Please know that I do not make this decision lightly. In fact, it has been a very difficult and painful decision. Over the past few weeks, Jane and I, in consultation with top staff and many of our prominent supporters, have made an honest assessment of the prospects for victory. If I believed we had a feasible path to the nomination, I would certainly continue the campaign, but it's just not there.
The Democratic Party, and in large part, the population itself, agreed with. All of them were on board for it. Joe Biden basically says, yeah, I'm not on board for those things. And that's the person who the Democratic Party has chosen, the person who is literally out of sync and out of his error in regards to policy that the public and that the party as a whole wanted. To be the representation of the party, muttering, stuttering, cognitively challenged, that ran a race backed by media and the establishment of the Democratic Party itself in order to hide the fact that he was cognitively challenged, and right now hiding the fact that he's being accused of rape. That's the guy that the Democratic Party has lined up behind and said, this is our standard bearer. This is the guy who we want to represent us. Sanders, for his part, now explains how this crisis pushed him out of the race, meaning I can't stand by in this crisis and stay in this race. Let's hear this clip.
I know that there may be some in our movement who disagree with this decision, who would like us to fight on to the last ballot cast at the Democratic Convention. I understand that position. But as I see the crisis gripping the nation, exacerbated by a president unwilling or unable to provide any kind of credible leadership, and the work that needs to be done to protect people in this most desperate hour, I cannot in good conscience continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
He can't in good conscience stay in the race, the socialists. This is literally backwards logic. Even though I know it's considered the political norm, even though I know the media looks at this and says, yes, of course, this is what takes place. This is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. This is literally what you've done the entirety of this race. And if what you've done the entirety of this race has led you to this particular indignant point where you have to get out the race, maybe it's an opportunity to do something different. A little political imagination, Sanders, goes a long way. Let me be clear. It is a weakness, and a profound one, in nature. It is a profound weakness of guts, but also a profound weakness of imagination. That in the middle of a crisis, you can't come up with any other solution, any other thing to do, but drop out of the race. In the words of the annuals, I will borrow my pain for the next couple of hours as we're discussing the whole Sanders issue, but we need to accept something, and we need to accept something that cuts deep. For us, it is a dark, dark day. Not just for what's occurring now, during the pandemic, the lives lost and everything else, but also from the standpoint of what this means. Because I don't think people have entirely internalized what it means that Sanders has fundamentally flamed out of this particular race. The pandemic will go away in a few months. What you've just lost, however, will go on for years. The loss I'm discussing cuts deeper, it's more starker and graver than the anguish people are experiencing currently in regards to him flaming out of the race. Whatever anguish you are feeling at this moment, the situation is far, far worse. I apologize for making this plain clear, but the darkness of this day must be understood, it must be accepted, it must be analyzed, and ultimately endured. I mean, you can't really do anything else about it, right? You might as well learn something from it. Let this burn in you so significantly that for decades to come, you remember this particular moment, what went wrong, what went right, but also what you just lost. And that goes beyond just a candidate. We're in the middle of a pandemic with over 16 million people in desperate need of jobless benefits. First point, a percentage of the group that currently runs in the millions have lost their health care insurance, again, in the middle of a pandemic. Most people were paycheck to paycheck, meaning you have a society that is incentivized to force to go to work, whether they're ill and everything else is going to take to some degree with lesser priority, because after all, they have to feed themselves, they have to pay for their kids, they have to pay for their rents. None of those things are dealt with. This is where we are in regards to the United States in the middle of a pandemic. From the standpoint of Medicare for all, that's off the table. From the standpoint of elimination of student debt, that's off the table. From the standpoint of dealing with the homeless, that's off the table. To ensure nobody goes hungry, that's off the table. To increase wages, that's off the table. To issues of war and peace, meaning even from the standpoint of trying to get the troops out of Yemen or Syria, off the table. They have chosen Joe Biden. Quantify all of the pain of individuals for not having health care. Quantify the pain of an individual to have to deal with a health care bill in the tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because they had the temerity to get ill. Quantify what it means to get rid of student debt, 1 point something trillion dollars that's on the back of this particular nation, on the various people in this particular country. What does that mean to get rid of that? That's off the table. Consider workers making $15 an hour, if not more, and what that means for increasing the wages of even other workers in the context of your society. Consider what it means to strengthen unions and for unions to be able to negotiate and fight for benefits. Or for that matter, even putting workers on the various boards. Consider what it means, a wealth tax, and what that money can be used for, and the people that money could assist and help. Consider what it means from the standpoint of climate. Having solar panels on the various houses, incentivizing and going after oil companies, at the very least the subsidies that these guys get in order to put them in renewables. Consider your world. Consider what we've just lost. That's not conceptual. Those are human beings at the end of those medical debts. Those are human beings at the end of those college debts. Those are human beings not making enough for $15 an hour in order to bring that home to the family. Those are human beings. That's human capital that's been lost and damaged. Because this candidate, for all of his political virtues and for all of its moral and ethical virtues, didn't have it in him to go to war with the establishment that he pointed to, because the establishment's front person was a buddy of his. Bob, I mean, honestly, for last point, Lawrence O'Donnell explains politics. Let's hear Lawrence O'Donnell clip before we end this and I kick this to Bob.
If you don't show them you're capable of not voting for them, they don't have to listen to you. I promise you that. I worked within the Democratic Party. I didn't listen or have to listen to anything on the left while I was working in the Democratic Party because the left had nowhere to go.
Right there. Right there. If you as Sanders runs the campaign with the notion that you give over your fealty and allegiance in the beginning, then you get nothing out of that process because you have no leverage in that process. You've already given it over. Bob, the left has to grow from this, right?
Yeah, let me ask you a question that I think is going to irritate you.
Uh-oh.
Who would you rather have Elizabeth Warren over Joe Biden right now?
No. But let me explain my reasons. My reasons are political. It has to do with accountability. For Elizabeth Warren to run in a particular race where she can attack the left, attack people who she cares about, grift for votes and everything else, not back the guy, and then say, okay, now back me. What does it mean for you politically to support somebody who does that? And what does it incentivize later on in other candidates who may do the exact same thing? I guess
for me, the point of that question is I think that's as far to the left as even letting Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic Party is going to be. They're only going to have the capability or capacity to take in so many calls that people on the left are even demanding. And so for the idea to even organize a demand and demand Joe Biden to do this and that, sure, obviously you're going to get some things out of it. Obviously you'll get plenty of rhetorical wins out of it. But I don't think the people that are even there to write the policies know what people on the far left, the Bernie Sanders world, are even talking about. They don't know how to articulate it. They don't know how to organize it. Their connections and relationships are with billionaires across the country. If it talks about getting massive wealth redistribution, how do you even move the Democratic Party when the whole party is reliant on billionaires themselves? And so, sure, I get this idea of trying to make sure Democrats listen to you, but they don't even have their ears open whatsoever. So that even starting to have those demands falls rather short of where people are going to need to be of even opening those ears. And ultimately, as somebody who has the privilege to be in a place where there are only Democrats, I can easily form an opposition movement against the Democratic Party. As much as people are going to have to demand things of the Democratic Party, other people need to step out of that, and they're going to need to hold them to account by pressuring them with other candidates. We have people like that out there. They've been doing it for quite a while. We'll be joined by one, Brianna Cartwright, after the break, somebody who has been organizing and trying to pull the party to the left. We'll take a quick minute break. And yes, Jamal, again, I'm sorry, coming back afterwards, we'll talk about Joe Biden, the very, very likely Democratic presidential nominee, and how progressives can demand his attention. That and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Corporate media spin got you feeling like a square peg in a round hole?
Join Political Misfits, Bob and Jamal on Radio Sputnik for news and analysis that breaks out of the Thai red and blue paradigm.
Daily from noon to 2 Eastern Time on 105.5 in Washington, D.C.
Or at 102.9 and 104.7 in Kansas City.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Radio Sputnik, where we bring you welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my wingman and co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We're discussing the big news from yesterday. The era of Bernie Sanders is over. This will be an call-intensive show. We're going to allow you guys to call in to discuss. I know you are experiencing some feelings about this. I am experiencing feelings about this. And so let's have your thoughts and talk about this particular event.
Putting it mildly.
Now, I do want to respond to something Bob said, though, because I disagree that there has been this notion of a call and response in order to get what the left wants. But let's talk about that in a later segment where we can flesh it out. As always, your calls and tweets are amply appreciated. You can reach us by 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. So, as I started in the monologue, Joe Biden, painfully, has won the Democratic contest. His insurgent challenger, Bernie Sanders, after running an inspired but ultimately unimaginative, inflexible campaign, could not overcome the oligarchs, the media, and the Democratic establishment who effectively lined up against him to crush that campaign. I'd argue the ultimate failure for Sanders, however, was his own inability to do what his cause, and to do what he needed to do to win, basically. Meaning his limitations were his own. It wasn't necessarily something entirely imposed, even though the entire edifice itself lined up against him. The catch becomes, now what? Now what? Sanders needed to engage the race with a certain degree of vigor, imagination, and flexibility with ruthless determination that everything else was subordinate to him winning that race. That's not what happened. Biden wins. Now what? The catch becomes, what does it mean that Joe Biden has won this race? Does Joe Biden have what it takes to win this contest with Trump? And what does it mean even for the standpoint of going forward? In order to discuss, we have Brianna Cartwright, DNC member representing the Young Democrats of America. Brianna, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, basic first question. How are you feeling now about all of this? Let's keep the expletives down to a minimum because they may be on the tip of your tongue if they're like me. But how are you feeling currently about everything that took place in 2020 and this election season?
I mean, 2020 has been a hard year, just in general. It's been a real funky year, and I think it's still going to get even more funky. It's crazy. It's unique. We always knew that this was going to be a weird election. With Corona, it's gotten even more complicated and weird in different ways, and just, more ways than Bernie dropping out, but like how the convention is going to be still held, how DNC members are redoing their elections or having to have their elections, or elections in general. It's just a very weird year that we're trying to navigate. And within us operating unknown, it's frustrating. So I know your sentiments are more anger. They are.
If I'm being honest, they are. It's and you know what's wild about it? It's not even anger entirely. Like it's like this kind of weird feeling of incompleteness, feeling of slightly let down, feeling of potential. Like it's all of this stuff kind of bowled up into one that kind of just ends up where it's a complicated feeling. I keep saying it. My feelings are complicated. So I'm curious on you on this part. So Joe Biden, after Bernie gave his resignation, came out with a video titled "Bernie Sanders Drops Out the 2020 Race." Now, I'm like, all right, well, what's going to be offered in this video? It should get interesting. I mean, after all, he's trying to appeal to people. He has a 24% enthusiasm rating, so he needs to appeal. This is his moment. Let's hear the clip of Joe Biden talking about Sanders, and I'm going to play the entirety, as I understand it, at least listening up to the point I listened to it, of his sentiments regarding Sanders in this race. Let's play the clip.
Earlier today, my good friend, and he is a friend, Bernie Sanders, announced he was suspending his campaign. Bernie's always been a passionate voice for progress, and he put his heart and soul not only into running for president, but also the causes and issues he has been dedicated to his whole life. He's inspired and energized millions of supporters, especially young voters, to join him in championing a progressive vision for our country. And he didn't just run a political campaign, he created a movement. And that's a good thing for the nation and for our future. While Bernie's campaign has ended, I know his leadership is going to continue, including working to address the incredible challenges we're now facing, the ones that are facing this nation under this.
Now, to me, this is kind of like an abusive relationships. After you've been slapped and beaten, it's like, look, I'm sorry. Everything is okay. We can make this work. That's honestly the way, the tongue wag afterwards. What does Joe Biden have? One, was that sufficient for you in order to come on to the Biden train? And what does Joe Biden have to do in order to get your support? I'm curious.
So I will state this. This is the most public and first time I've stated this. Let me actually let me rephrase it. So I do not want Trump to have another 4 years.
Right.
And so I am going to work hard to make sure that does not happen. There are things that I can definitely say of being disappointed of Biden being the nominee for multiple reasons. But as we've seen in other parts of our lives, unfortunately, sometimes you're just given a deck of cards that you have to figure out how to deal with, right? And still try to figure out how you're going to win with crummy cards. And so that's where I feel we are at this point. I think that one of the main things for me to feel more secure about supporting the ticket is concentrating on his vice presidential pick. I think it's crucial. I think it's crucial in uniting the country. I think it's crucial in victory, so that people who are less enthused by Biden's past actions and baggage or mind gaps or whatever you want to state has a really great support, where we want our VP to still be in that White House and rally around getting that person elected. Going back to some things that you're saying in the beginning, I think, one of the main things was, there was a lot of people that was in this election that were bright hopes of change, a lot of diversity. So I would say my disappointment and my sadness occurred a little bit before yours, as we saw how things and so I think, capturing that in the VP is very important. He said that it will be a woman.
Klobuchar. If he chooses Klobuchar or Kamala Harris, would that enthuse you in this process?
So I will say those are both fierce women. I have some hesitance about Klobuchar, about how I have some hesitance about Klobuchar, so she would not be my first pick. However, she's a very strong, accomplished, policy-driven, get things done woman that I respect. Kamala, as many people know, I admire. I've been admiring her for years, lived in California. Of course, she is not the perfect woman. No one's going to be perfect. I admire her. That being said, I do think that it's kind of dangerous to pick somebody that did run for president because this still creates a division. I think it might be more beneficial to pick someone that everyone generally likes and have less baggage to hold.
I'm gonna come out early, Brianna. I'm gonna come out early. I'm putting people like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, ahead of these senators who had ran. I don't know what an Amy Klobuchar, somebody who's not exciting whatsoever to the left, or a Kamala Harris, a former prosecutor. I think I'm with you. I think these senators who have already ran, they showed they flailed out at a national level. Obviously, there's something wrong about them as individual campaigners that weren't inspiring the masses. And if they've already given you their endorsement, that's all you needed from them. They don't add anything new to you. Obviously, Joe Biden's going to need somebody that kind of brings a level of sanity, and people can at least say he could take over if he's Joe Biden's unable to govern. I think that's going to start on maybe day one. If I had to put a guess on it, when he's no longer able to effectively govern, that he'll need somebody that's ready to step in. And I don't think America wanted Kamala Harris or Amy Klobuchar off the get, and I don't think they want them as their second choices as the background. have a few callers on the line. Let's first get to Justin. Justin, are you with us?
Hey, howdy. So I want to comment on an earlier conversation in regards of Bernie being a failure. Oh, by the way, I'm a big fan of your show. So Jamal, Bob, awesome job, guys.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, so in regards to Sanders being a failure, I disagree with that to a certain degree. So I believe he actually managed to crack the armor of the establishment. Now, still a few moves need to be played. So in regards of his next move is consolidating the entire left and disenfranchised voters. I think that's the next move that needs to be played. Mind you, that he has like this mega donation machine that he has been, that he has managed to collect over this season. So if he can manage to consolidate all of that power and give it over to the left, the disenfranchised voters, man, we could do like mega damage to this political system as it is right now. I'm gonna get off. I'm at work.
Really appreciate it, Justin. I'm curious about that, Brianna, if you hear that or not. I think it's really interesting, the usage of Joe Biden using the word progressivism. The Democratic establishment did everything it could to squash any mention of socialism. It seemed like the light compromise was you could use the word democratic socialism, and we'll let that into the sphere of conversation. But it wasn't like Joe Biden yesterday said, oh, thank goodness for Bernie Sanders. He brought us a taste of democratic socialism, and now we're going to speak to you all and how to pull you in. Instead, he said progressivism. And for me, progressive and that notion has been completely hollowed out in America. There's so many neoliberal democratic types that consider themselves progressive. And in some classical definitions of expanding the government, having some type of social liberalism within your government, sure, a lot of these people are quote unquote progressives, but for me, we need somebody that's radical, somebody that's a socialist, somebody that's off of these normal definitions. I don't think Joe Biden is going to give any credence to anything socialist that was created by Bernie Sanders in the movement. So did Bernie Sanders, is he able to accelerate that conversation, or is Joe Biden just going to say progressivism and that's going to be his play to the left?
That's a complicated question. I think that the coin of progressivism is interesting and it's been morphed, just how I think the incorrect usage of establishment has. I think it's been loaded and changed and not properly analyzed and used more for politics than actually digging into what it really is. And as a Black woman, I think, we stand on the cornerstone of, of what it is to be a Democrat and what we want to see in the progress. And I think that we've kind of steered away from that a little bit. As you know, you've heard when America, gets sick, Black people have the flu. And I think if we target a lot more into actually focusing on Black issues and fixing those, as a lot of these oligarchs like to say, that could be the true trickle down in society. And so I think that focusing on policy more, I think is important for our nation than the actual person. But if we want progress, I think, having a Black woman VP starts that progress. And everybody's going to see progress differently. I think
but that's the kind of always, I absolutely hear you. And I do think the messenger obviously needs to be paired with the message. But if the takeaway from Barack Obama, the great symbolic win was that a Black person can be in the White House, they can be president. I don't understand the identity politics of like a Black, why not a trans person? Why not an indigenous person? Why not? I mean, there's all these other identity markers. And if we're just going to simply try to keep on winning symbolism, we're never actually going to get to those policies, which somebody like myself cares much more about policies. I don't back many candidates very often, but I try to back the different policies that I push. And it seems like I think that's what the Democrats' play will be, is simply, look, we're going to appease you with symbolism, but we're not going to actually give you any of the policy.
Well, if you look at who we're running against Trump, I mean, I feel like, so I kind of, and I don't know if I finished that sentence, I think one of the issues that we have as Democrats, or wherever you want to fall within your title of your identity politics, is we have really picked our people apart. We found wrongness in most of things, and most people, right? We can go into the wrongness of Bernie, like we can, of course, go into the wrongness of Clinton. Like we pick our people apart, and it's been happening for the last 4 years. I think one of the differences and the unique advantages Barack Obama had is he was a new, fresh face. We didn't have that pick apart as much, or that baggage. And so you say we have the atrocity of Trump. We have a reality show host as a president, and now we're on Survivor. And I think that comes from, this new pop culture that America is really taking to. I know that I heard the disdain from the previous person about Warren, but, Warren presented a lot of policy, right? Even Clinton, she presented policy, but it was less about the policy, and we talked about the messenger. So if we want to pair, policy with the messenger, it starts, that people start arguing, well, the messenger isn't good because of this. The messenger isn't good because of that. And there was a lot of great policy that was on the table, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know many people who can say that most of Warren's plans wasn't, thought out and great, and she's still doing them. No,
you're absolutely right. And if in Arizona, where you are, policy would have voted, we would have saw Bernie Sanders run away with it there and across the country. So obviously, the pop culture, celebrity nature of our politics looming large. I don't think she would serve as a number 2 to Joe Biden, but early money has to be out there on Oprah Winfrey getting a look at that VP nomination, Jamal. I say that in jest, but I do think it's going to be a more celebrity kind of culture pick. It's going to be somebody that hasn't been picked apart already. We'll see what we find. But Brianna Cartwright, we're out of time with you, unfortunately. We had a lot more to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Great. We'll take a quick break on Radio Sputnik before coming back to talk about the latest job numbers and the continued autopsy of the Bernie Sanders campaign. Tomorrow, the body's still warm, but we're going to dig in. Political Misfits live in D.C. We're back after this.
The body's still warm.
Wow. This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey everybody, my name is Tim Black of the Tim Black Show. This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my wingman, Iron Man, Bob Schlehuber. We're going to continue to discuss various facets of Sanders dropping out of the race, particularly what it means for the left going forward. And that's the part that I am most interested in discussing. What does it mean for the left going forward? I know my audience is smarting over this, and if you're anything like me, a bit annoyed with a strong helping of unsatisfaction, but that said, give us a call at 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. Apparently, we have a caller on the line right now. Ben, you want to talk about Sanders? What's going on?
Mr. Stark?
Yes.
I don't think so. So basically, I'm not sure if you ever played the game, The Evolution of Trust or something, or if you have you're into game theory. But Sanders is what I would consider a cooperative player in an unfair game.
Yes.
That's
true.
Even
I agree with you.
Wait.
I agree with you on this. The catch becomes, or the question really is he a cooperative player intentionally, meaning he's okay with going along with the Democratic Party, this is kind of just sheepdogging, or is it a cooperative player unintentionally, meaning he really does have these ideological biases. These ideological biases effectively attach him to a particular system that is fundamentally flawed, cheating, and is not working. And yet he believes, just based on his biases and based on the things that he can imagine as possible, goes along with it. Meaning he's cooperative, but he's uncooperative in being cooperative, if that makes sense.
So my thing, just quickly, I think that he has radical revolutionary ideas, but I don't think he pursues those in a radical revolutionary way. I think he's more of a reformist and a pragmatist. And I think that at the end of the day, like, he's not one of those leaders that would, stab himself through the chest to hit someone else on the other side, sort of a person.
Yes.
And Trump, it may be for ego, whatever you want to call it, however you may feel about him.
He is. And this gets to my point about why weakness is so endemic on the left. Like, I often ask that question, why is weakness so endemic on the left? Why is it the thing, this aspect of the political spectrum that is so weak? Dude, thank you for your call, man. I appreciate it. I agree with you. Trump is that person. Sanders is not. We have a new caller, Anthony. He wants to comment on the previous segment. Anthony, how's it going?
Hey, what's up, guys? Love the show. I just woke up listening to it so much. Love the show so much.
Very cool. So what's the comment?
I just wanted to add something to the conversation I was just hearing about character versus policy. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to make the point that a lot of those people that we got so critical of and attacked, you might say, their character, I guess rooting all of that, like the whole purpose of attacking their character was because it kind of revealed whether or not we could trust them to get that policy across.
Yes, I agree with you, Anthony. Thank you for the call, man.
Yep.
I mean, it really does matter whether or not you can trust the individual. Anybody can say anything. Elizabeth Warren, papers even recorded this, had not thought out the whole Medicare for All stuff. She jumped on it for political reasons. And then when she was found out, got mad that people were calling her out for not believing in what she put. The moment that you're revealed for not backing a particular policy, how can people, especially when you're like this big ticket policy where you're on stage after stage after stage, and they realize, oh, she doesn't buy it. Well, what does it mean for the other policies? You can say whatever you want. The catch becomes, I don't know what's in you. And because I don't know what's in you, I have issues of trust associated with picking somebody who just shown herself to be dishonest. Like, character matters, especially if you can show over the course of a particular history that the person was flawed. And, how can I believe you now, especially in comparison to when I have somebody who's not, or flawed in different ways. And this kind of gets, I think, to a point of contention between me and you, Bob, where I slightly disagree with something you said. And so let me think of it this way. I look at this and I think to myself, there were and let me start it this way, because I don't want people to say I'm ragging on Sanders. There are certain positives that came in this race with Sanders being in this race. Honest to God, very like positives, and you can't take it away from him. He shifted the hegemonic norm regarding the positions on the left. He gave space to the arguments where the Democratic Party can't claim that they're unpopular, because that was for the last 50 years what people have been told. He single-handedly destroyed this excess of Democrats over the last 50 years, or this excuse over the last 50 years that you must take cash and then do incremental policy, because if your policy goes beyond and hurts the people who are giving you the cash, you're going to lose money, making you lose the race. So you must take the cash and just deal with incrementalism. He shamed Amazon in the United States, in the UK, to paying their workers $15 an hour. Now that shouldn't be understated, because those people are getting more money now as a result of that shaming. He webbed together a nation under a vision of what it could be. Now, whether or not that fizzles out or not, he was able to do that all across the United States. And this is where issues divide. Because basically he had the positives diverge from the opportunities. Basically, he missed opportunities. And he missed those opportunities not because the media was against them, not because the Democratic Party was against them, not because the establishment and oligarchs was against him. He knew that going in. He never shut up about the fact that they were going to be against him. He lost this because he did not have the imagination or the flexibility in regards to his own ideology compared against those things. Meaning all of those big items that Sanders was talking about mattered less than his ability to be able to functionally change in the political space that he was in. Meaning you're in a political system that doesn't honor honorable men. You, at some point, need to use a knife. And I use the Obama example. Obama would get out there and he would give that euphoric speech, hope and change America, and all this other stuff. And then he would make a video saying Hillary Clinton is a liar, Hillary Clinton can't be trusted, Hillary Clinton will say anything to get elected. Why? Because both of those are parts of the toolkit. It's not, it's like, I don't like my rooks, so I'm not going to use my rooks. That's nonsense. The people who are in the political space are willing to use all of those tools in a toolkit, and you have limited yourself to just that. And I think that's where the fatal error lies. Whether it's with the black vote stuff, where both of us have talked about before, whether it's with the inability to be able to fight on issues of civil rights, despite the fact that he was in the race, you had a situation where Joe Biden, who was the billionaire's choice for a candidate, and because of personal feelings about Joe Biden and the ethics around those feelings, you weren't able to do the job that was necessary to get all of those massive issues accomplished. In fact, to put this just in perspective, and I'm going to hand it over to you about unions. The very basis of a union is to be a protest. It's a demand followed by, we're not doing X if you don't do Y. Because nothing is going to be given to you in this system where every incentive in the world is to not give it to you. Our issue in this country is self-interest. Maximize your profit by hook or by crook. And you don't believe that that settles into each and every individual in this country to some varying degree? Meaning in the political space where you have billions of dollars, they're not going to give you anything. There's no incentive to give you anything. And so if you say, I'm done participating in this process, and you make it completely impossible for the other political party to win, well, that's your demand. That's no different than a union. That's no different than civil rights where they're sitting down in lunch counters. How do you, as a socialist, get into the political space and can't even do what is necessary in the same thing that a union does? This is what I want. And this is my protest. And right now, where Sanders is flaming out and getting out of the race, you have a group of lefties. You gave this article, Bob, who are saying this is what we demand. Well, the question becomes, if they don't meet your demands and they tell you to kick rocks, what do? If you knuckle under after they do that, then your demand didn't mean anything. The same thing applies to Sanders. Right now, what Sanders should have did was, with those youth groups out there, I'm standing with them. This is what we need, Medicare for all. This is what we need. I don't think Joe Biden can win this race if he doesn't back these policies. Yes, I personally endorse him. By the same token, I understand my supporters if they don't back him, if he's not pushing for X or for Y. If Joe Biden loses, then they lose. But at the very least, lefties would have been able to have an organization and a brainchild in regards to putting out a demand. And you were able to show the fact that that particular demand would be honored if you don't do X or Y. Now, you might be right, Bob, that the Democratic Party doesn't care. They're perfectly capable of losing to Trump. They're perfectly capable of losing the next election. But at the very least, it allows lefties to organize into something of a brain center where they can actively show clout and leverage. Right now, this is just weakness. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, I want to just kind of pick apart one of the things you said around like character and trust. And so stay with me here. Short answers. what did Bernie Sanders, you know what he did with the civil rights movement in the 1960s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what did he do in the 70s? What about
sure.
in the 80s? What about the 90s? What about the 2000s? And so I think that for me is really one of the biggest driving points of why Bernie Sanders wasn't able to close the gap with Joe Biden or with the Democratic establishment party, is that he had the 1960s, but it turned into the what have you done for us lately? And Joe Biden, I know. He just lied about it all. He said all the different crazy stories. Black people rubbing his legs when they were wet, getting arrested with Nelson Mandela, the most absurd, ludicrous things. But everybody in their family has somebody that always is telling stories, always yammering away, always saying stuff that you know isn't true or whatever. But you know Joe Biden, even if it was to support segregationists, has been across the South. And the last 12 years, because of Barack Obama and riding his coattails, he's been across the South. And so it came to character and trust. And so as many people that really did trust Bernie Sanders, that were deeply invested in politics, were studying the policies that he was putting forth, helping draft some of those policies. Nobody had seen Bernie Sanders in the South within the quote unquote black communities that he needed to have won along the way. And I think that level of trust in this old white Jewish guy from New York yelling at them about stuff they already know wasn't able to connect with them. And so I think there was something to be said about him needing to take some more of a race conscious lens if he was going to win and create the movement that would have catapulted him into favorability. If you would have came out, I'm going to come at you hard tomorrow, come at me bro Friday around reparations. Again, if he would have had a policy that would have closed the gap and erased his 40 years of not being in the South since the civil rights movement, if he had some type of driving policy that said, I get race, I understand how class and race are inexplicably tied together, and if you can't address class, you can't address race, and you can't address race, you can't address class. He went full on the class message. I expect that from somebody, a white senator from Vermont. He wasn't expected to do organizing in the South. He wasn't responsible for pushing black issues in the Senate if that's not his constituency. I'm not saying he needed to have done any of these things. Bernie Sanders, you do you. You've done more than I have done. You've done more than all of these people. But at the end of the day, if the goal was to win the presidency and you enter in 2016 and you come back in 2020 knowing this is going to be a hit on you, you have to come back into the second run with a different tact. And instead, he sticked heavily on the class stuff. Early on, they beat him up for it. They said, look, he cares more about white rural voters in Ohio than a single black voter in Mississippi. His campaign reflected that. It reflected the way in which it hired people, in which it gave money. I did back of the envelope math on 15 organizers within the black community that I know across this country for a mere $10 million in a campaign that raised hundreds of millions of dollars and had plenty of clout. Back of the envelope math could have given him a ground game across the southern states that would have dramatically changed the outcome of where we are today. Instead, he stuck with the team he had in 2016 that failed to win the older black vote, and it failed to expand its electoral reach beyond mainstream Democrats who tune into mainstream media all day, every day. And so, yeah, obviously hindsight's 2020, but I think plenty of people out of 2016 were saying, you got to address these things heading into 2020, or you'll find yourself back in the exact same place. And that is where he is today.
So I disagree with parts of that. God, man, the come at me bro is starting early. So I agree with the organization. That's no issue. I agree with dumping money into that. No issue. I think my disagreement is whether or not that would have worked. Like, you have a situation where Joe Biden is the typical creature of the Democratic Party, every bit as much as Hillary Clinton was the typical creature of the Democratic Party. And in being the typical creature of the Democratic Party and in rubbing shoulders with Obama, I don't believe for one iota that organization was going to pry those people away. And Sanders continues to run the race in this way. Meaning, if nothing else changes except for the organization front, that somehow was going to pull the vote. If Sanders continued to just make these aspirational speeches, if Sanders is like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I don't think that works. It's not that I don't think it helps. I think it helps. I think the issue for Sanders, honestly, because he hit his head on the black vote. I mean, people can bring up all this other stuff, but ultimately, Sanders, if I'm sitting in a room with Sanders and I am his, some advisor in regards to some political advisor, I am telling him, you need to get the black vote. You need to find out one or two ways. Either you need to get it somehow in something that you're saying or doing, or you need to rip it out of Joe Biden. Well, Kamala Harris.
But how do you get the black vote if not having policies that speak directly to race? But somebody like yourself who pushes heavily on class-centric policies, how do you? I think black people obviously care about job growth, home ownership, things that aren't black people
Exactly.
issues. Those are across the
people
board. But there are specific racial issues around, say, policing and mass incarceration that he didn't embed himself and say, look, I'm going to let you. Black mortality rates for infants in this country amongst Black women is the highest and disproportionately focused on that population.
I know, Bob, but
health
those are issues of
outcomes for the
class.
Black community.
That's
but how
kind
do you
of my point.
But you still
Those
need to
are
lean
not,
in and say,
Bob,
and there's race
those aren't
implications.
issues. You're acting as if African Americans are somehow uniquely different than other human beings. The issues of health
in America, they're treated uniquely
wait.
different.
You honestly believe that an issue of a mortality is not an issue of class? Access to resources, access to healthcare, access to education.
But the outcomes of if you compare poor white people with poor Black people, Jamal, you can't tell me the outputs are the same.
But why? I mean, the level of poverty the level of poverty from the standpoint of African Americans and the level of poverty from the standpoint of whites is drastically different. Like even the outcomes, all that stuff. I'm making the point to you that if you're talking about leveling off the society, and you're saying, how do we move in a direction that's beneficial to, let's say, a particular racial group, African Americans? The fact that the poverty is so much less, the very act of having healthcare available will cut down on mortality. The very fact of having student loans and getting rid of the debts off their backs. You realize that the more Blacks actually try to go to school, but ends up either not finishing because of issues of not being able to pay for it. I guess I'm making the point that I don't doubt that taking a racial specific lens in some cases. And even in the criminal justice bill that he wrote, that's kind of my point, Bob. Like all of this stuff. Look, if you're telling me, if we're having a conversation and you're saying doctors tend to prescribe African Americans less pain medication for issues of just implicit racism, agreed. If you tell me that cops tend to lock up Blacks 4 times more for issues of structural and again, implicit racism, you agree. No issue with that. But when I'm looking at the human experience, I don't know how to stop people from being more racist. I do know how to deal with inequities, especially gross inequities that are there, that's substantiated from the standpoint of race and made structural. That I can deal with. The other part I can't. And
yeah, but you're not running for president, and you don't need to win the Black vote. You needed to find a way to speak to those issues. I don't know how necessarily to address it either. But if you're running for president and you were Bernie Sanders, you needed to figure out a way or a message that addressed those implicit racial biases, Jamal, because a wealthy Black person, as you just mentioned, is going to be less believed by a white doctor, even if they're rich. They're going to be less believed, and that has fatal outcomes for that person's life. And money is not the end-all, be-all when you have racism. And unless he can speak to the wealthy Black person that is getting treated racist or sexually harassed or whatever you want to say it is constantly, he needed to have found that message, and he didn't find it.
But I disagree with that. I mean, the message was there. I mean, look, if Biden wasn't in the race, the overwhelming majority of African Americans would have voted for Bernie Sanders. Let's be honest. I mean, we're talking about a 90% thing where any random Democrat would get the Black vote. So he just needed to get through the primary in order to get to that point. There was no issue. I've seen polling on this stuff. There was no issue with African Americans voting for Sanders. Sanders, my argument is that it wasn't the expansive message. It wasn't the issues of policy, because those policies would have dramatically benefited African Americans over anybody else that was in the race. Not even close. Joe Biden literally was running on, I was Obama's guy. And Blacks who look at the Democratic Party as being just their normal party threw their lot behind the person who's the standard bearer for the party. Meaning you had Clinton, you had John Kerry, you had Al Gore, and in this case you had this. I guess my basic point is you put a knife in him. This is not an aspirational policy conversation. This is, you need to put a knife in him in order to make that point clear that this guy is not who you're saying this guy is. And that needs to start early, and that needs to start aggressively, making the argument that he is unelectable. Yeah. He didn't do that. He didn't have that in him.
No, I hear what you're saying. I think the knife would have came in the form of some big policy decisions, a real long knife, and then just not showing up at the end of the day. Jamal, I did just want to touch, we got a few minutes left before we have to turn to a quick end of the hour break on these latest job numbers. New numbers are showing us today 6.6 more Americans filed for unemployment in the past week. That's a shock. That's on top of 6.9 million last week, 3.3 million the week before that. In the past 4 weeks, more than 17 million new unemployed claims have been filed. Looking at these numbers on a graph is wild. You'll see a small, steady rise and fall for decades, and then you hit a 2020, and it's just a straight line up towards the sky. Top economists quoted in the news stories about this surge today figured unemployment is already at 12 or 13%, definitely in Great Depression territory. Obviously, Jamal, we know it's much higher than that, given how America counts and hides long-term unemployed people as they kick off the unemployment rolls. Experts quoted in the New York Times say the unemployment rate will hit 15% soon. And they also say that forecasts and predictions now are really just guesses. I got to imagine there's companies that are hanging on for a month, maybe 2 months. But if this thing continues on into the summer and fall, there's going to be tens of more millions of jobs lost. We haven't seen how bad it could get. As for those $1,200 checks, Jamal, I haven't received mine yet.
I haven't received mine either, Bob. I'm waiting for it.
I'm waiting for it. The Washington Post points out that it takes 2 to 3 weeks to process someone's unemployment claim in normal times. Since Trump declared a national emergency on March 13th, state unemployed systems have been overrun, causing even longer delays. Is Congress even talking about new specific relief for those works out of individuals? I hear not. They did pass, seemingly moving forward, a small business benefit bill today. So hopefully that adds some relief to people. But again, it's directed just at businesses. The Washington Post describes Congress relief efforts like this. There was hope that swift government aid for businesses would entice companies to keep workers employed and paychecks flowing. But job losses have mounted even after Congress passed a historic $2 trillion relief package. Well, yeah, Jamal, when you give it to corporations that just do company buybacks and prop up the Dow Jones, they're not going to give money to the unemployed workers that they're laying off. It makes me think so much of the tax cuts by Donald Trump and how it went to those huge corporations, and those corporations did buybacks, and it was just pennies on the dollar that made it back to workers. Jerome Powell, the U.S. federal chair, said this morning that there is every reason to believe that economic rebound, when it comes, can be robust. Jamal will continue to ask, robust for whom? We have to take a quick break. We're going to come back more on that warm autopsy of Bernie Sanders. We'll talk about how the media is going to prop up Joe Biden and much, much more. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. About to say astronaut, lesbian, space, drama. We got it all here on Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Tweet us at Sputnik Misfits, or you can check us out later on this evening, iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, all those great podcast platforms. And as always, check us out on the YouTube Progressive Soapbox channel. Make sure to like us and share with your friends. 202-521-1320. We continue our conversation now talking about the media's coverage of the Democratic presidential primary and how their coverage will now pivot with only Joe Biden and Donald Trump remaining in the race. We're joined by Alan McLeod, journalist, media analyst, and member of the Glasgow University Media Group. Alan, thank you so much for being back with us.
How's it going, guys?
It's good. It's good. Thank you, Alan. For me, and Jamal may disagree, the Democratic Party is banking on the November election to be a referendum on Donald Trump. The sole question Democrats want people in America asking, do you want another 4 years of Donald Trump being your president, or do you literally want anything else? I mean, the Democrats are going to run on the old campaign slogan, at least we aren't that guy. I literally yawn when I hear it, but it seems like that is their best strategy. This strategy, Alan, hinges on the belief that Hillary Clinton in 2016 was uniquely hated, that Trump won because the Democrats picked the only candidate that Trump could beat, and that any other candidate now in 2020, after 4 years of Donald Trump, can easily cruise to victory. It absolutely has to be their strategy, because if they think tens of millions of people are going to be excited and turn out and vote for Joe Biden regardless of Trump, they're out of their minds. Alan, what do you think about this analysis? Because we're going to get into talking a little bit more about the media's silencing of these sexual assault charges against Joe Biden. And that whole Burisma, Ukraine, firing prosecutors thing, Joe Biden's also going to have to account for when the Republicans get a hold of him. But Alan, do Democrats really think that Joe Biden's offering something, or are they just playing that people hate Donald Trump and that's what they're going to run on?
Well, in 2016, that's exactly what they ran on. Hillary Clinton didn't really have many policy proposals. In fact, she ran the least policy-rich campaign in presidential history. We've seen academics study this and show that she actually talked about policy far less than Trump. And frankly, her pitch that she wasn't Trump was pretty much the only good thing about her. And it does seem that in November that Joe Biden is going to be the candidate, and that is really his only pitch to American voters. Who knows what's going to happen in the next few months with the coronavirus? But, frankly, when we look at Joe Biden, the media coverage, how he presents himself, he never explains what are Joe Biden's policies. Even supporters of Biden can't really seem to mention any of them. And that's because he never explains them. I suppose the only thing he's been adamant about is opposing Medicare for all. He said just a couple of weeks ago that he would veto any plan that was passed by the House and the Senate for comprehensive medical reform, saying that it would be too costly. And his first speech he gave when he was kicking off his campaign about a year ago was at a rich fundraiser where he said, quote, "Nothing will fundamentally change." And, we saw this in 2016. The Democrats tried the same thing. It backfired terribly. They stank the bed. Is this really going to be a rerun of this? It seems that that's what they're proposing.
Yeah, I think that's what they're basically going to run on. And that's why I think Joe Biden, he does have policies. He's against Medicaid for all. And he's against things like marijuana legalization, which is another just kind of national left-right united movement of policy that, again, he's actually aggressively speaking out against these things. And it's just shocking to me that he's actually working in the opposite direction of policies that he hasn't put forth. But Alan, I alluded to it. The other big thing that I think Republicans will be more than happy to run with, one issue that Bernie Sanders and other Democrats have been trying to avoid having to talk about, is about a new article here you put out in Mint Press titled "The Media's Loudest Me Too Champions Are Ignoring Biden's Sexual Assault Accuser Tara Reade." You write here in the opening of your article, "Have you heard about the Joe Biden allegations? If you're relying on corporate media for your information, the answer is probably not. As of April 8th, there have been exactly zero coverage of the sexual assault allegations on CNBC, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, or CBS." It seems like, Alan, if the media went hard to block Bernie Sanders, they have to now be pivoting to go hard for Joe Biden.
Exactly. I mean, can you imagine if this sort of thing had come out against Bernie Sanders? Remember in January, a simpler time really, when Elizabeth Warren said that in a private conversation, Sanders told her that a woman can't be president. I mean, that dominated the media narrative. That it was a complete nationwide scandal for about a week. Sanders kept getting asked about it. The media treated it as if it was not only a credible allegation, but a proven allegation. And yet, when Biden is questioned, or a much more serious allegation in comparison, it's complete crickets. It's just total silence. And that total silence, I should say, from the mainstream media. You do see conservative-leaning sources like Fox News and alternative media like Democracy Now! Or my outlet, Mint Press News. We're covering it. But the fact of the matter is that the media are covering for Biden. They do not want him put under any scrutiny. But the fact of the matter is that there are a whole range of sources that the American people can have a look at. And if any of them are even partially interested in conservative media, they're going to hear about it. And they're not going to like what they hear.
Yeah, and for me, Jamal, it shows just, again, the ridiculousness of the Joe Biden pick. And I guess maybe credit to the Democratic Party. They play to win or lose elections. They don't play to win elections and then govern, to organize, to bring people in, to include people, to write good policies. They simply play to win. And that's what happened with Barack Obama. Barack Obama wins, and in the next 8 years, they lose over 1,000 seats at national and local levels across the board. They basically push out the greatest organizing effort that had ever been created, Obama for America, grassroots organizers sleeping on floors across America, knocking on doors all day long. The first thing Barack Obama does, he locks the door, kicks those people out, hires a bunch of people that wear khakis all day, and says, now these people are in charge. You get the John Lovetts and the John Favreau's and the whatever podcast, this and that, America. Those annoying people ran the country, and they basically disenfranchised all of the voters and the movement that got him into place. And now you're going to put up Biden. Joe Biden's going to get into office. You're telling me that the Republicans, if they have control of the Senate, aren't going to impeach him on the exact same thing that the Democrats try to impeach Donald Trump on regarding Ukraine. Biden's on tape bragging about getting a prosecutor fired in Ukraine. His son, obviously, Hunter Biden, is going to be brought back up into the media. And all of these sexual allegation charges are just going to continue to flood the media once they get a hold of the guy. He's damaged goods going in, and he's going to surely be damaged goods if he's elected.
Here's the key thing with Obama, though. Regardless of everything else, regardless of his failures, regardless of giving 95% of the income to the top 1%, regardless of the bombings, the drone bombings, regardless of all that stuff, Obama won. That's the point, right? The moment that you win, you get to have the run of the roost. Now, you can be bad at organizing, in which case you lose all of those, 1,200 seats all throughout the United States, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. You lose it all. But you did win. And in the pursuit of that win, I think there's fair questions that the left needs to be asked as, hey, how did he do it as the insurgent candidate who was supposed to be risky and who the public, for the most part, didn't trust? How did he pull that off with this kind of expansive rhetoric? How did he do it, but Sanders couldn't? I think those are fair questions. I'm curious, Alan, what do you think about that? How did Obama, who was the Bernie Sanders of his day, at the very least in a perception standpoint, how did he win the race, but Sanders, the real Bernie Sanders, couldn't do it?
Well, I think what you said there about him being perceived as the Bernie candidate is really the important thing, because in reality, whereas Obama had a great rhetorical game, I mean, look at what his policy was. I mean, he carried on the United States foreign policy of Bush. He had a reasonably conservative economic policy. His signature achievement, Obamacare, was basically lifted from Mitt Romney, his opponent in 2012.
Alan, let me intrude there just for one moment. It gets better than that. It gets better than that. Go back and look at the debates between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Obama says, I'm going to have, my healthcare plan. Hillary Clinton says, I'm going to have my healthcare plan. Hillary Clinton says, well, I'm going to have an individual mandate to ensure that people get the healthcare plan. Obama says, I am not going to do that. And he browbeats Hillary Clinton in one debate after the next, saying insurance companies are going to love Hillary Clinton's healthcare plan because that individual mandate is effectively a giveaway to corporations. Obama gets in office and immediately implements the individual mandate that he attacked Hillary Clinton for supporting. Oh, it's awesome! Like that is delicious on so many levels. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that tidbit in to make it that much more plain of what that 2008 race was compared to the race that we have in this one.
I think it's a style versus substance issue, really, because we all know that Bernie Sanders doesn't really have much style, but he has a heck of a lot of substance. He's been talking about the same things, a total outsider in elite American politics since at least the mid-'80s. Whereas there's a lot of people out there who are trying to copy the rhetoric of Obama. Somebody like Pete Buttigieg, his rhetoric sounds extremely progressive. He actually sounds quite like Obama, sometimes even like Sanders when he speaks. And yet, nobody really bought the idea that he was a dangerous challenge to the establishment. And that's the real difference. I think people in Washington are deeply concerned about the idea of Bernie Sanders ever getting anywhere near the White House, in a way in which they were basically easy with Obama getting in, and they certainly would have been easy with Buttigieg as well.
It's just...
Yeah, I'm curious, Alan, with the style. I guess heading in now as we talk about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Obviously, Donald Trump not having a great fare of it here when it comes to responding to the coronavirus. It looks like his administration knew well into January what was about to hit them in the face, and we're now running out of national stockpiles of N95 masks, the masks that basically prevent from breathing in particles that would carry the coronavirus. We're seeing Donald Trump's failure to respond to basic supply chain demands across the country, putting Jared Kushner, of all people, in charge. We continue to see this big steal of the money and drifting it away to big banks. So it seems like the messaging of what he is doing and how he's hurt people and how he's going to unnecessarily cost tens of thousands, if not more, lives here in the United States. How do people message against that? I mean, it's always the question of how do you break through the Trump diehards and actually get these messages to them? And now we're seeing body bags. We're seeing short-term grave sites potentially being discussed in New York. Does this fall against Donald Trump? And how do people start messaging against him and what he's running on?
Well, I think the coronavirus is going to expose Donald Trump for a complete charlatan, a complete fraud, somebody who is out of his depth, incompetent, and more. But that's not particularly new in the White House. We have had that before. And so certainly Joe Biden can try and harness that energy. Problem is that he's not really offering much of an alternative. He's just saying platitudes rather than coming out with plans. Of course, it's 6 months away or more till the elections. And so it's very hard to really know what's going to happen. You know, sometimes there are decades where nothing happens, and then in history there's a week where a decade happens, and we're right now really in some sort of really hyper normalized world where things are just crazy things are going on every day. So it's very difficult to suggest what might happen in November. But frankly, in a lot of ways, I think the Democrats have already won in a way. And what I mean by that is that the corporate Democrats, the people who are in charge of the party, have managed to see off the standard surge, and they've managed to get Biden into a position of power. He's the presumptive nominee. And so, frankly, if Biden wins or Trump wins, for a lot of those people, they probably don't mind another 4 years of Trump. He will continue enriching the 1%. They can go for all sorts of like drives of saying we have to get Trump out of power, we have to pick it up. So people like them are going to be the ones that are flying. It's ordinary Americans that are really going to be suffering under the Trump presidency. The people who are unemployed, who are bankrupt, who are in prison just now, people who literally are struggling to find things to eat right now. Those are the sort of people who might turn against Trump. How do they do that? That's a difficult question.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Because, you know, the question becomes like the biggest dilemma from the standpoint of the left was that the Democratic Party wasn't necessarily, they weren't on board for Sanders, even to the degree of Trump winning. Like, Joe Biden was the guy who could harness the black vote in a way that could beat Sanders in a similar way of Clinton. And they were willing to allow Trump to win, even at the expense of Sanders, because Sanders changes the party for a generation, whereas Donald Trump, for the most part, they still retain control. I absolutely agree with you. I have a question for you by our producer. Basically, do you believe that the press conferences, you know, Democrats have been complaining and arguing that the press conferences that Trump has been having every day, that he shouldn't be able to have those and they shouldn't be covered. Do you believe they're helping him or hurting him? I mean, in some cases, he's like yelling at reporters. He's telling people that they're horrible and that they're horrible at their jobs. Do you think this is a benefit to him, or do you think people see through this in regards to, you know, this is a president that allowed all of these people to die as a result of his own incompetence and malfeasance? Which one do you think it is?
Well, for some people it'll be one, for some people it'll be the other. You know, he is certainly behaving very erratically, as you said, attacking reporters. Some bizarre people have turned up like that, you know, that pillow executive for ages at Trump's speech. So certainly thinking people who've got their heads on straight are looking at this, scratching their head in awe of what's going on. This is an amazingly incompetent administration who did nothing for weeks. In fact, you know, pretty much sticking their head in the sand and blaming the Chinese. Well, I'm afraid that when, as you said, body bags start piling up in all the major American cities, I don't know if just directing people's rage towards China is going to work, frankly.
Yeah, because that's literally what he's doing. I mean, basically, Donald Trump has been dancing. Like right now, the death toll, we haven't did the totals for today, so let's do the totals. in the United States, epicenter of the coronavirus. He had months of notice. Like, that's the part that burns the most. Donald Trump knew in advance. In fact, they knew what it was going to be health, and they knew what it was going to be to the economy. We covered the story the other day by the New York Times talking about behind the scenes memos. And even if you didn't get that, the selling of the stocks, because the selling of the stocks is very specific. That's, oh my God, the economy is going to take a hit. Why? Because people are going to get sick en masse and die and not be able to do their jobs. Meaning they knew. And he was too incompetent to do anything about it. Even recent, like weeks ago, he still hasn't put in the Defense Production Act to make sure they built the supplies and the ventilators and all of these other things that were needed. He is massively and utterly incompetent. And thousands of people are going to die. 454,602 total cases. 19,575 new cases. And keep in mind, with every new case, there are more new cases because many times those people didn't know they were infectious, so they were just kind of mulling around. 16,074 deaths. 1,286 new deaths. This is based on the incompetence of the administration itself. And by the way, let's also put this at the door of the capitalistic system, who didn't make ventilators, didn't make masks, didn't make surgical equipment, didn't make vaccines. Why? Not because your society didn't need them, because it wasn't profitable. Like, it's a perfect storm. Alan, I agree with you. The catch becomes what does the public do in this situation? Does the public get so angry that they turn over the system, or does the public go back to some level of normality? Do you think that the coronavirus changes things going forward in regards to our system?
Definitely could. This is certainly an opportunity for people to push forward an alternative vision for society. The coronavirus has really exposed all those things that we were told were impossible, were too expensive, were crazy. They've just been passed like with a click of the fingers. Universal basic income's ridiculous. Look at all the countries doing it. In fact, the Trump administration has proposed sending people out checks in the mail. So immediately that was gone. Oh, you'll never get prison reform. Oh, letting people out on bail, letting people out to save their lives. All sorts of things have just been done instantly. Everybody seems to be working from home. We were told that was impossible. You have to come in the office. Rent strikes, sort of moratorium on people getting kicked out. All sorts of things are happening right now, which really change the perception of what is possible and what is impossible. But it all depends. Something I want to pick up on what you just said. If you're watching MSNBC, they'll say it's all Trump's fault. If you're watching Fox, they'll say, it's all China's fault and blame the Democrats. But the problem is that we really have to start looking at the entire system itself. And neither the establishment left media or the establishment right media really want to do that, because ultimately they agree on how society should be run 95% of the time. And that's the problem. We have to really start thinking about huge critiques of the entire system, about changing society for the better.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head when it comes to the lack of democratic response. And you talk about critiquing the whole system. That means the Democrats as well. And it seems like the Democrats at least pushing back a little bit. A $250 billion small business bill that was trying to be put through the Republicans has now been stalled by Democrats, demanding more support for minority-owned businesses as well as healthcare workers at state and local levels. And so maybe some opposition, at least to try to get some of those finer points through. But that initial $2.2 trillion bailout, which is going to balloon up to $4 trillion, as some estimates had shown, was done so in a bipartisan way that both of these parties, the Democrats, have obviously been captured by corporations and billionaires, that their interest, just as much as the Republicans, lie with making profits over people. And yet we're always kind of told that the Democrats are supposed to be the heroes of the left, but nobody's there talking about a universal basic income that lasts for 6 months or even a year. Nobody's talking about freezing rent pays. Maybe there's a moratorium on rent increases, but any of those radical policies that would actually be good for people that live on the margins, Alan, those aren't being included or even discussed.
Exactly. And you really have to follow the money. Even though the Democrats and the Republicans are at each other's throats rhetorically all the time, they can't seem to agree on anything. There's actually a concept in sociology called the narcissism of minor differences, where the closer you are to a person, the more rabidly you will attack them. because these tiny differences become, ballooned up into these big problems. But ultimately, if you look at where most of the Democrats get their funding, they get it from Silicon Valley, get it from Wall Street, they get it from big pharmaceutical, big medical companies, get it from big oil companies, the defense industrial complex as well. These are the same sources of money that pump billions of dollars into right-wing causes, into Republican politicians as well. And so ultimately, what you get is whoever pays the piper plays the tune. And so we have pretty much the same policies, whether blue or red, left or right are in. And ultimately, we have to sort of step out of that corporate funded focus and start building alternative media, alternative politicians to build an alternative society.
Yeah, Alan, Jamal alluded there talking about the changes that we'll see from COVID-19. I wanted to ask you on a different note about the changes we'll see in the world of tech and what's currently being exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. You were quite busy there yesterday at Mint Press. You put out another article. Google's dystopian crisis tracking could be straight out of George Orwell's 1984. You highlight in the article about how Google has been releasing user data to help fight against COVID-19. Yet we've been seeing that over the last month that the data has been being collected in nefarious ways. And while it might help the slow of the impeding pandemic, the continuation of the pandemic, it also seems like our civil liberties are being more and more chewed away now.
Yeah, I mean, Google has been trumpeting how it's working with all these governments around the world to try to slow the spread of the pandemic by using location services to track people. And really, I see why they're doing it, but really this is pretty much the only justification for that technology possibly existing, because it's the only sort of application of it which isn't completely nightmarish when you start looking at it, because Google ultimately uses that to track us, to sell us more and more things. And then it often works with quite repressive governments as well to help them track people, to give them access to what they look at online, etc. And so really, this instance of the coronavirus is really opening up a window into how much Google knows about us and how much these big companies, big tech companies, really have a big control over our lives. That's not something that we've really had much of a public discussion about. And most people probably don't even know and haven't consented to their data being included in this.
Yeah, I mean, the PR push by these big tech companies, I mean, it's amazing that because tech is seemingly cool, we just assume that cool people made it and they have cool intentions with it. And the nefarious actual usage, the profiteering of it, the selling of our data, the tracking us against our consent is so quickly kind of hidden behind the curtain, Jamal, that I don't think that many people know the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, the Facebooks and the Peter Thiels of the world. They're working with the Atlantic Council. They're meeting directly with Donald Trump. These tech companies are not cool, but then they get a New York Times feature where it shows how they're able to track people, and when one color hits the other color, it changes colors. And wow, isn't that cool? Like Periscope. I mean, all of it's all these like buzzwords that feel really cool, but at the same time, they're eroding any semblance of civil liberties left in this country.
Yeah, I think people need to, I mean, look, McLeod is right. They need to take a page out of the book that these guys are capitalists and they're taking actions that are in their fiduciary interests. That's it. The product, whatever the product is, like when you go and get a hamburger, McDonald's is not making hamburgers, even though they make hamburgers. McDonald's is making dollars. Their job is to maximize their profit. The hamburger is just the way they do it. And that's our entire society, including tech. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Like, and Alan, I think you'd agree with me on this. The notion that your society says, look, just go and make as much profit as you can. And somebody says, hey, the way I can make this much profit is kind of dovetailing our technology, facial recognition, artificial intelligence with potential governmental sources in order to better track and hunt down other human beings. Like this is dystopian in its nature, but the people need to realize that the dystopian aspect of it is because it's not used for the benefit of humanity. It's just used for the important profit. And whether that's tracking somebody down, whether that's some kind of facial recognition software to exclude people in some particular way, it doesn't matter. The buck is the main point. Alan, am I wrong on that?
You're not wrong, but let me quote something from the founder of Google, Eric Schmidt, and they said, what McDonnell and Douglas was to the United States in the 20th century, big tech companies like Google will be to it in the 21st, essentially saying that they wanted to position Google and big techs as, if not direct extensions of the US military and the CIA and Washington more generally, certainly working hand in glove with these organizations. And you have to remember, like, whenever you're offered a free service on the internet, that's not the product. We are the product, you know? It's our eyeballs, our attention that are being sold to big companies. And this goes even further. Like, for instance, nowadays the technology exists that Google, for instance, takes information from your Fitbit. It knows your heart rate, so it can tell if you're hungry or you're thirsty. And if you're passing a bakery or a big supermarket, it can geolocate and micro-target ads right to your phone saying, hey, there's an offer on Coca-Cola, buy some more of that, you know? So it knows so much about us. And this is being used at the very best for amoral purposes and quite often at the worst for control and domination over the population.
Yeah, I mean, that's what just angers me so much is that we have this technology that could do such good work for people. Maybe on that senior who doesn't have support families, they could wear the bracelet or the watch, and basically we could be informed if they needed extra support. But instead, it's basically used to make money and to kill people. So that's great. Alan, I am kind of curious, though. We've now seen this tracking tool with the coronavirus be used in Israel. Shin Bet overseeing it there. We saw Wuhan, the province in China at the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak. Basically, people wanting to leave that province had to have a scanned code on their phone that shows they haven't been in contact with somebody with the coronavirus. We're seeing Google and the United States use the same type of technology. And I'm assuming that over some of the next months, we'll see more of that kind of roll out, and there'll be different tools that are used in the tech spaces. How do we make sure that those tech companies are being held accountable while we're trying to battle this pandemic?
It's a good question. And reality is that we can't. These companies are massive, unaccountable monoliths that traverse the entire globe. These are really transnational corporations. And unlike the government, where we at least have some say over what goes on, we can pressurize our local representatives or give phone calls to people or what have you. There's really nothing we can do to hold enormous corporations like Google accountable. And so, frankly, I think in the long term, these companies have to be broken up or regulated or nationalized.
Yeah, I think you're right on point there. That's Alan McLeod, a journalist, media analyst, and member of the Glasgow University Media Group. Alan, where's the best place people can find more of your work?
Yeah, I mean, Mint Press is where I write a lot. I write fairness and accuracy in reporting, or you can follow me on Twitter at Alan, A-L-A-N-R, McLeod, M-A-C-L-E-O-D.
Alan, thank you so much for joining us with that. We'll take a quick minute break before we come back with our Trends with Benefits segment. We'll look at Clearview AI and more nefarious tech. You are listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're live in D.C., and we're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now, the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber here with Jamal Thomas. It's Thursday. It's 1:30 p.m. and it's time for our weekly segment, Trends with Benefits, where we cover the latest trends and let you know if they're your friend or future enemy. We're going pretty full on enemy today, Jamal. Spoiler alert. We look at facial recognition software, a trend we have followed for quite some time. A new expose is out, though, this week, connecting the dots between facial recognition software provider Clearview AI and founder Cam Hon Thon Thot with police departments, elected officials, and leaders of the far-right white supremacist movement here in the United States. Many of you out there, political misfits, saw the feature on Clearview AI in the New York Times back in January. In that article, Clearview is described as the most powerful form of facial recognition technology ever created. The software has collected over 3 billion photos from social media profiles and websites. Clearview AI image database is almost seven times the size of the FBI's. With its mobile app, anyone with the software can take a photo of a person, and that photo will match with the database and instantly spit out a person's name and background information. Clearview is already being integrated into augmented reality glasses, so people can identify almost anyone they look at. Clearview has contracts with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and they work directly with FBI agents, members of Customs and Border Protection, and hundreds of police officers at departments nationwide. And now we have a better sense, thanks to Huffington Post, that Clearview and Cam Hon Thon Thot, the founder, have deep connections to alt-right leaders such as Mike Cernovich, a Trump-affiliated propagandist who spearheaded the near-deadly Pizzagate disinformation campaign, Andrew Onheimer, a neo-Nazi hacker of the webmaster for the Daily Stormer, and Pax Dickinson, the former chief technology officer of Business Insider, who went on to march with neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thon Thot is shown also to have close relationships in the article with billionaires such as Peter Thiel, a Facebook board member and Trump advisor, Jeff Giese, a Thiel protege and secret funder of the alt-right causes, and Charles Johnson, a former Breitbart writer and far-right extremist. To talk more on this topic, we are joined by Shane Stranahan, producer of Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. Shane, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Bob and Jamal. How are you doing today?
Good. Shane, I first want to on air just thank you for all the work you do as part of the team on Radio Sputnik, but a special thank you to all of the dry runs you helped us with. Before we could get the show off the ground, we spent hours preparing, practicing, doing our intros and outros, creating these different segments. So a big thank you to joining us for those conversations.
Yeah, just interrupt real quick. The audience doesn't know that, right? Like, we had dry runs for like 2 weeks. And Shane was nice enough to add his skill, intellect, and talents to helping us get the show to where it is. So Shane, thank you. I want to give my own thank you. Thanks. Go ahead, Bob. Do your thing.
Yeah, no, but Shane, in those dry runs, we talked about Clearview amongst ourselves, and you actually talked quite a bit about the relationships that Cam Hon Thon Thot has with right-wing leaders in the American political theater. And so this article is basically 3 months behind where you were, telling us about some of these stories and the relationships. Tell us a little bit more about these connections, Clearview AI, and your thoughts on facial recognition software.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, and thank you so much for the kind words you were saying. It was just an absolute pleasure to sit in with you guys, to talk with you, and it's been fun seeing the show. And I'll tell you, it's spring around here, so we're seeing a lot of plans come up. But as I've been working on the show, it's also been fun hearing your ads come up all over the place. You're releasing a whole bunch of new ads for Radio Sputnik, and they're great. They're hilarious, and that's been a lot of fun to hear. But for darker topics, I'm going to turn to Clearview AI. So yeah, just to sort of reiterate or recapitulate what you said earlier. Clearview AI is a sort of facial recognition, public surveillance software suite that was being pitched to law enforcement agencies and companies, major companies, including Best Buy, over the last couple of years, and has been used by them apparently for tracking down quote-unquote criminals in a lot of cases. And the trick, and part of what we need to understand here, is that their database, what they're doing is they search through pre-existing photos, often ones that were released on social media. Their database is over 3 billion images large, which is just dwarfing the size of even large intelligence agencies' databases. And every photo that law enforcement agencies submit to track down, their suspects is added to this database. So it's sort of building slowly like a snowball. along with the social media posts that people make. And again, like you said, we talked earlier a couple of months ago about the sort of alt-right connections, these far-right figures, including some folks who are like very clearly advocating for a sort of an ethno-state, a violently achieved ethno-state in some cases, who are, again, have these weird connections to this very profiled founders of this very high-profile company. Just to give you a brief background on this, so this actually started a couple of years ago. Like you said, Hontun That is an Australian who immigrated to the United States when he was 18. This is a little bit over a dozen years ago. And more recently, he's done some sort of interesting stuff online, kind of shady stuff online that I won't get into, but you can research for yourself some of his deeper history. But then more recently, he's been doing this sort of facial surveillance thing. It started with this small company called Smart Checker that was co-founded with a former top aide to Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York. They were doing a sort of preliminary prototypical version of this surveillance tech. But Schwartz actually got into a sort of high-profile public sort of personal reputational disaster, and partly in response to that, and partly in response to other associations that were publicized at the time with people that they were hiring, just sort of right-wing figures who were saying pretty nasty stuff online. They like reincorporated, they changed their names, and now instead of Smart Checker, they're known as Clearview. Clearview AI is, again, a very large service being used by hundreds of police departments across the United States. And so it's just weird. It's crazy if you look into the connections, like you were saying, Jeff Garcia, Peter Thiel, very high-profile figures in the sort of alt-right and in the even just in the DC policymaking space. Where if you look at, you mentioned Charles Johnson or Chuck Johnson, Charles Johnson, Jeff Garcia, and Peter Thiel were as a team formally and informally advising, according to the Huffington Post article, the Trump administration when they were looking for science and technology leads. So these people, if you think about them, were again not just through the company, but also on a environmental end, this weird bridge between very far right ideology and the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, you think of Chuck Johnson there, as you mentioned, a former Breitbart writer, saying that he viewed this technology as a way to potentially identify every illegal alien in the country. That's the mindset these people have in it. And I thought one of these quotes that the article included about the dangers of this type of tools, they included this is one Liz O'Sullivan. She's the technology director at the nonprofit Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. And Ms. O'Sullivan is quoted saying, the fear is that the kind of authoritarian control this tool will wind up in the hands of the wrong people. But Shane, aren't the wrong people the ones making the tools themselves? So it has nothing to do with actually winding up in the wrong hand. It's the Peter Thiels with his billions of dollars, basically just writing checks on the spot and actually creating the tools themselves that are being used for their own personal projects.
I mean, that's part of what makes this an absolutely huge story is that part of what Luke O'Brien, just to call him out, was the one who wrote this article in Huffington Post. Like you said, there was earlier reporting on this story in the New York Times, a pretty good long report, but this came out especially with these alt-right connections. This was a very good article by Luke O'Brien. But part of what he's talking about in here are these deeper connections with Peter Thiel, again, funder of Palantir, major founder of PayPal, and founder of many, many different tech companies. Made a lot of money with Facebook, but many tech companies since then. And apparently he was a very early sort of seed funder who really got this stuff going. We don't know specifically who on the team he funded, but to the tune of $200,000 before before Clearview became as prominent as it has in the last couple of months. He funded one of the founders of this. Now, that might be some thought, but we don't know. That wasn't revealed. But again, between the policymaking end, we actually haven't talked about this yet also. Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Moldbug, the founder of the neo-reactionary movement and the Dark Enlightenment, widely connected to all of these people. And in terms of the policy end, or in terms of the sort of intellectual roots of this stuff, you look into him, some of the things that he's advocating are just horrible. I mean, not just open racism, but literally calling for a CEO to be the head of the United States, calling for a dictatorship openly and unabashedly in his writings. And what's surprising is to see how sort of deep and apparently tight the connections are between, again, all of these figures.
Yeah, and I thought the article, it did so well was showing how all of these things are interconnected. You have your pop culture, neo-racist, nationalist, connected here with elected officials, connected with big tech people. Those big tech people are talking to other elected officials. You have different agencies and chat groups that are connected to this. I mean, it basically connects all the threads to show that our world's interconnected and that these systems play into one another. And the stuff is really scary then when you add in those tools. You mentioned Peter Thiel and Palantir. Palantir is just a data mining software tool that basically then aggregates a bunch of data and tries to predict which people in communities will commit crimes based on where they live and who they know. And then they try to basically target those people. And then now you have this facial recognition software, which is allowing you just to look at somebody and then pull up all of that data. Jamal, it shows the nefarious interconnected systems that are actively working every day against, I think, the class movements and the broader people movements that you yourself are calling for.
It is, but it's funny. I know this is going to sound so bizarre considering what we're talking about and what we talked about in the last segment. After listening to Alan and after even this conversation, I realized I disagree with Alan on a very particular point. And that's making me actually rather hopeful. Like all of my complicated feelings about Sanders and everything else aside, I have this particular conversation. I hear you guys talking about white nationalists and white supremacists effectively working in regards to tech and government and spying on the various people and trying to track every illegal immigrant that's in the country as if you're going to deport, 10 million people. I listen to that and I'm hopeful. Yes, I'm a bizarre person. But what I hear when I hear you guys make that point is basically two things. Sanders was in contention to win. That's the first point. The second point is that everything that you guys are just talking about is just an ideological fight. Now, the catch is the left abdicates its ability to have that fight. Whether you're talking about Sanders, whether you talk about Corbyn, because of issues of ethics, because of issues of morality, none of them are real. None of it is real. None of Sanders' ethics, none of Sanders' ideologies, none of Jeremy Corbyn's ethics, none of Jeremy Corbyn's ideologies are real. And yet, the left is often handicapped by that. I often wonder why weakness is endemic to the left, and I think that's why. The reality of it is, the left has the potential, especially fighting on this notion of integrity, because Sanders' weapon in that race was integrity. The problem with Sanders was that his integrity, his ethics, his ideas also restrained him from actually having a political fight, an ideological political fight, which is all you guys are talking about. You're just talking about right-wingers engaging in what they want to see the world look like. The left needs to be able to engage that ruthlessly, and the left has a larger weapon in that because the stuff that they're talking about is utterly dystopian. The left just needs to be able to have that fight and to be able to say everything else that we are fighting for. People who are homeless, people who are out of work, people who don't have ends, people who are, are going to the hospital and having this massive amount of debt, all of these other big crises, and use that as every incentive and every impetus in the world purely for political expedience to get what you want to accomplish. That's all I'm asking for. And for whatever reason, that seems to be asking for a radical thing. What do you want ideologically in the world? What do you want your world to look like? What do you want your society to look like? And to go at that full on. Now, in the case of all of these other people, that's all they're doing. I don't like it. It's dystopian. It's horrific. It's horrible. But a capitalist corporation is going to do what a capitalist corporation in order to maximize its profit. And working with the government allows it to do so. Cops are going to buy that product because cops want to lock people up. That's their incentive. That's their modus operandi. So, of course, they're going to use product. Like, all of this stuff is just incentivized by the ideology that we're working with. And these guys have just taken it a step further than the left, who is all over the place and disparate, and organize themselves into finding a way to get the society, dystopian as it is, that they want. My hope in this is that the left analyzes 2020 and realizes they can do the same. That's why I'm hopeful. Now, is my hope on this, Shane and Bob, misplaced? Either one. Shane, let's go to Shane first.
I don't think your hope is misplaced, but I think that it needs to be followed up on with hard work. Pardon me for the cutout there. I think that the point that you were making about the fact that it's ideological, the fact that it is ultimately an ideological fight, I think that that's valid. I think that the problem is in times of crisis, people look to institutions, and when those institutions are failing, as for instance, the United States government is in a lot of cases with the coronavirus response, their response can be one of many things, but it can turn into sort of pessimism. And a lot of where people turn with their political pessimism is this sort of more fascistic ideology.
Yes. That's the fear.
Thing.
That's what freaks me out. Honestly, like when you're analyzing like World War II or Germany after the First World War, it is dystopian. Like the stuff that the society started to believe, the stuff that the society was willing to accept, and all of it. I mean, you can put a large heaping of it based on the chaos that was involved in that government without having any kind of real option for trying to bring it together. I mean, honestly, they've gotten to the point where they were like, we need a dictator. We need a strong man to bring the society together. You have socialists fighting in the streets and communists fighting in the streets with right wingers or with Nazis and whatnot. We need something to bring the country together. The country was willing to say, all right, put Hitler in. Like, that's kind of my point, right? Like, it can go either way. You need a left-wing option. And maybe the fear here is that there is no left-wing option in this. And maybe that's the terror that you guys are perceiving. Bob?
Yeah, or I guess, I don't know. I think of the ability to hate and get to people to rally around hatred. I mean, that's the whole model of Facebook. It's not oriented around loving and being kind and spurring conversation. People don't come back for that. People come back to aggressively hate things. Countries and nationalism is centered around hating a thing and having an enemy. Obviously, we've seen Donald Trump push this the last few months, at least with China and the COVID-19. It's easier to hate China than it is to rally the troops and say, everyone, we need to love each other as a global community and bring people together. So I think the challenge for the left is just much more difficult. And if you're trying to be a pure leftist who doesn't play into this billionaire game, when it comes simply to financial resources and somebody just cutting you a check on the spot and then being able to go make that resource, the funding is light on the left. And I think that's the other big problem. Shane, just got about 30 seconds left before we got to take another break.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the bellicosity against China is very worrying. But with the left, I think that there's a huge opportunity with the coronavirus crisis. A lot of things that we've been pushing for, I mean, the healthcare institutions, if we can revitalize those, if we can reform those, there's never been a better opportunity. And that's such a big plank that there might be a victory here. And so I think that there is reason for optimism. It's just a matter of getting it done, you know?
Absolutely. That was Shane Stranahan. Shane, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, guys. Have a great one.
You can check out Shane Stranahan, part of the Fault Lines team here on Radio Sputnik daily from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time. Check that out. That is with the only Lee Stranahan and Garland Nixon. Well, with that, Jamal, we have one more 1-minute break to take here on Political Misfits before we wrap up the news for the day. We're live in D.C. and we're back after this.
On Fridays, we get punchy. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM or 102.9 or 104.7 FM in Kansas City to debate host Jamarl Thomas. And be warned, no one's holding him back.
Come at me, bro. Come at me, bro.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory, or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Back to Political Misfits, the show that runs against the grain. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Inventive and observant co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Shout out to Bob for helping me out with something. I want to turn this attention to a story that would have been big news if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. I'm talking, of course, about the astronaut lesbian in space drama. Oh, we get to talk about lesbians. Nice. So the ex-wife of an astronaut was charged this week with making false claims to authorities. The ex-wife of Lieutenant Colonel Anne McClain, said that McClain had illegally accessed her bank account from the International Space Station. Let me repeat that. McClain said that she illegally accessed her bank account from the International Space Station in space. The Army Times says that this is the first time someone has been investigated for a crime allegedly committed while the person was in space. This is already very cool. My producer is telling me don't go full perv. I didn't mean it in that way. I just, okay, fair enough. I'm not even going to go there. Anyways, McClain was cleared. The timeline didn't work out, so now the ex-wife, Summer Warden, is in trouble. They say she filed a false complaint against McClain to the Federal Trade Commission in March 2019 and made more false statements in an interview with NASA Investigations in July 2019. Warden had originally said that McClain had stolen her identity by accessing her bank account during McClain's 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station. The two had gotten married in 2014. They eventually merged some accounts, but after they split, Warden said they took back control of the particular account and changed her password. But she says McClain continued to use it long after she was supposed to, including during the ISS mission. That is fascinating. I don't know if we've had a case where a person committed a crime in space before. Up to this point, apparently, we still haven't. I can't reach my Wi-Fi when I'm in my front yard. But astronauts can do it in space. That's amazing to me. That has some powerful space connection. Warren announced that she accidentally gave investigations the wrong date, so with luck, we haven't seen the end of the story. We may actually get that conviction of somebody who's committing a crime in space. I definitely want divorce court in space or something to get me through this quarantine. Bob, this story is fascinating. We're going to, for the first time, get potentially somebody going to jail for committing a crime in space.
Space law. I'm telling you, it's the new frontier. Yeah, I mean, it's like, how do you think of who owns space and what jurisdiction do they fall in? It's kind of like the seas, in the ocean of who has jurisdiction in space. And obviously a lot of countries clamoring to get up there and to launch their space programs and satellites and international space stations. But yeah, I guess how would you protect yourself? Like, who's checking on your accounts when you're on a 6-month mission or on a years-long mission in space? It just seems like it's a ripe time for identity theft.
That's so wild.
Like this happened,
That's so wild. It's even this thing of, right, how do you, are you, what jurisdiction? Are you over New York? How does that work? How does that work? Maybe it's the issue is where the crime takes place. Maybe that's it, right? If it's me, she intruded into my account. I live in Florida, so it goes to Florida. I do have comments real quick. Love the live video format. When your guest says something crazy, it's entertaining to see your expressions. Keep up the good work. Final Yogurt. Thank you, Final Yogurt. Sucky. Bernie is a sellout, and y'all Bernie bros fell for it. Oh, that's hurtful. That's hurtful. Bob.
You fell for it, Jamaro. You fell for it. The hook, line, and sink. Remember the post-Nevada fist bump that you did?
It's like, it's over. It's over. The race is over. See, my biggest concern was South Carolina. I kept, honestly, when I watched this race, my thought was, there's so many momentum shifts that's taking place from state to state to state. And so the national polling is always a lie to some degree. The race is being had in the states, and people are making their mind up from state to state to state. And so when you hit South Carolina, and it's like, all right, you got to bury Joe Biden here. You got to bury him here. You got to put a stake in him here. And he didn't do that. He just gave the same stump speech. And you're like, oh, that's not it, dog. That's not it. That's not going to do it.
But you want the man
Bob. Let me ask you this, Bob. I'm curious, from your standpoint. I asked the other person, but they didn't answer the question. Do you think Sanders is a willing participant in a contest, meaning he's fodder. He's effectively a sheepdog. He gets in the race, he gives his ideas, but ultimately he's always going to fall in line. In which case, he's a knowing participant and effectively taking advantage of the population and basically conning. Or do you believe he's an uninterested actor in that process, but he continuously finds himself in the position that, despite not being for it, thinking in a somewhat pragmatic, not necessarily a radical sense, he just says, all right, this is the best that I can do. Like, which one do you think it is? He falls in line? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just laughing at that. You're entertaining those two. I mean, I know I can hear the hurt in your voice.
I don't know what else it could be.
did he con us all? No, I don't think so. I think he was an unwilling participant. He had his brand. He liked to be Bernie Sanders, the crazy-haired guy from Vermont. He didn't want to comb his hair. He didn't want to go back to the South or the North or the West to find what was troubling Black voters. He didn't want to spur the movement across the country back in the 70s and 80s. I'm sure he was always there, the first person to respond if somebody called him and they needed help in very powerful, important ways that drew him to the national consciousness and why so many people loved him and poured affection on him. But at the end of the day, I don't think he wanted to be president. And I think we've seen that. If he wanted to be president, I think he would have had to lay the groundwork decades ago. And I think it just became too much, too late. The Democratic Party saw him coming this time around, and he was pushed out. And again, it just seems so bizarre, just as quickly as it came, it's gone, Jamal. I think that's kind of, for me, struggling to process as all of the anticipation, all of the years waiting for him to run again. And then just like this, on a bizarre day where Wisconsin voters are told to go out and try to fight one last fight for Bernie Sanders. Maybe the DNC will hold one more debate. I mean, can we still get that April debate?
By the way,
Democratic Party
risk their lives to go and vote. Imagine
and then the next day, And then the next day he was just like, I'm gonna get out of this. I don't want people to keep going and voting. But my God, you had to think that a few days ago. And I think in many ways his campaign was well on life support a few months ago. But now he's out and it's Joe Biden's time to shine. Put the spotlight on him. Don't turn up that light too much because he starts sweating pretty quickly under the pressure of the lights. But hopefully his home studio will be enough for him tomorrow over the next few months. Jamal, with that, we got to get out of here for the day. We have another show for people tomorrow starting at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Share our show, Spotify, iTunes. Give us some reviews. The Progressive Soapbox on YouTube. Those likes go a long way in getting more people to listen and to join our little movement here on Political Misfits. Big thank you to Alan McLeod, Brianna Cartwright, the engineers working hard for us in the studio, and our producer, Michelle Whitty. As always, for Jamal Thomas, I'm Bob Schlaber. Thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, I appreciate you guys viewing. Great show. This is the after show. Since I've been doing my channel in this particular way for the last couple of days, I think this is going to be the way we do it going forward. We do the show. You're able to get a visual. I think that just works better. In fact, I think that even just looks better. So let's see. Who's commentary? I take a few comments and we call it a wrap. Stop touching your face, Jamal. My bad. Frank Smith. I didn't realize I was doing that. Reparations are for the lazy communists. I am Solar. That is fucking insane. I don't believe that Sanders or a politician, especially if they're running on the left from the standpoint of class. I think it's a bad policy, even though I agree with the policy. I think it's bad politically, even though I agree with reparations. But to say lazy communists, look, you got a lot of work, buddy, that your country is benefiting from. And you did not pay for that labor. You got that labor dirt free just based on a military and being able to put a mud hole in somebody else. Lazy communists, no. Lazy communists, no. All right, I'm going to end this here on the lazy communists conversation. Our country, Jamal, I don't know who our is. I live here too, and I have a difference of opinion. My opinion is the only thing that matters. I'm only accountable to myself. One Post Daily, do you think corporations will push for a strong move on automation to handle the quality of jobs? Yes. Yes, they have to. Like, this is not conjecture. This is more so incentives. I trust the incentives in the process. What are the incentives of the corporations? We need to cut costs. Cutting costs allows us to make more cash. Either cutting costs or, meaning automation or shipping a job overseas. Well, they've been shipping jobs overseas for God knows how long. They did that. So why wouldn't they do the automation if they get the opportunity? Yes, automation. Cars, trucks, those jobs are going to go away within the course of 10 years because there's no point in putting a person in a car if you can have an interwoven web of cars that can talk to one another, drive on the streets and interact with one another. Those products can probably go faster and everything else. Meaning the human being is going to be deprioritized in jobs like driving, like Uber and those type of things, Lyft. Walking into a store at some point, it's going to have a security guard there, but your ability to engage with workers and everything else is going to be deprioritized because they're just going to have an automated counter. You walk in, you walk out, it hits your credit card can even still be in your pocket. Who knows? I guess to make it the point that every incentive in the world exists for corporations to put in a robot to do a job of a human if they can save a nickel off that process. Those nickels add up. The answer is yes. Now the catch and the question I think you're asking is, does this spur automation to higher rates, considering that those companies need somebody to do that job, and having the human beings in this process get ill and sick and tired and blue and have girlfriends and all that other stuff? It's like, does this push that forward? And the answer is maybe. Like, share,